All right, welcome again. We're talking about interest groups today. And this is one of those lectures that if you're one of those laissez-faire kind of capitalists, let the business do what it wants to do, you'll find something you like here, you'll find something you don't. If you're one of those people who say business is evil, you'll find something you like here, something you won't. This lecture is probably the greatest value added to any political science lecture you're going to get or American politics lecture you're going to get, in the sense that this is my area of expertise. This is what I know, probably better than arguably all but 10 other people in the country, in the world, in terms of economic policy. So I hope that you find that to be true, especially from a biblical perspective. All right, so let's get into it. One of the reasons that I give this talk is because when we talk about interest groups does not automatically mean business interests. However, 2/3 of the interest groups at any level of government, so whether we're talking about city council, whether we're talking about state, Texas legislature, whether we're talking about Congress, or even the executive branches of those three levels of government, when we pool or poll those interest groups, almost 2/3 always are composed of interests representing financial entities, which is to say businesses. The rest of it is made up of some combination of labor, which say workers, and the public groups, senior citizens or representing at-risk youth. We'll get to this composed of middle and upper income when we talk about the participation lecture. All right. Why is business useful? And this is a message more to you Christians. Because first, businesses meet needs. What needs do they meet? We're going to hit this more importantly in a moment. Businesses create goods and services. Every business you know provides something that consumers want. If they don't, they're out of business. And so that's a good thing. Proverbs 11:26 literally says, he who withholds grain, the people will curse him. But blessings will be on the head of him who sells it. Not gives it, sells it. Providing a good and service for people. So providing the grain that people need to eat. Also, businesses provide jobs. So people can have the money they need to go buy grain and all the other things that they need. So businesses meet needs. Specifically to Christians, businesses also help fund the gospel. They fund philanthropy. And I'm going to get to this in a moment. Think about the gentleman with the upper room where Jesus and the disciples ate the Last Supper. Somebody had to own a house with a large enough upper room for 13 people and food and furnishings for all those people. Somebody needed to have the money necessary to keep the gospel going. And we all know that the God calls on us to give our tithes. Does he need our tithes? No, but he calls on us to give our tithes so that his gospel can go forward. Then thirdly, discipleship, in the sense that business people are people of influence. When Warren Buffett wants to say something, everyone pays attention. When Bob McNair wants to say something in the city of Houston, everyone pays attention. For those non-football fans, Bob McNair is the owner of the Houston Texans. But my point is, being a head of a business enterprise puts you in a position of influence over your employees at the very least, if not over a larger section of society, such that people will listen to you because of the influence you have over life, literally. And then lastly, making a profit. I want to lift up your heads, lift up your eyes a little bit here. And just to point out a couple of things. When, let's say an average worker, any average worker, if you're going to work, you're going to make a minimum of $15K. That's probably poverty, I'm assuming that's the poverty line for individuals. Up to probably the wealthiest paycheck that any person gets, the largest paycheck any person gets. I'm just thinking right now, Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, made $50 million last year. It was reported that he made $50 million last year. So that's a pretty good spectrum. But think about your average business owner. Let's just say business owners, you're probably going to start at that same $15K. If you start a small business, small restaurant, you may not make a whole lot more than the average worker at your restaurant. Maybe not. At least starting off. For that matter, you may be the only worker at your restaurant, driving an ice cream truck or something like that. But how much do the wealthiest people in the world make? Let's think Warren Buffett, for example. How much is Warren Buffett worth? Anybody know? Exactly. About $40 billion with a B. Billion. 1,000 times more money is to be made. Now, how much time do you think Warren Buffett spends running his business? Do you think he spends more time running his business than Roger Goodell does running the NFL? No. My whole point is, and I came to this realization when I was in college, it was an amazing thing, that I could work the same amount of time for somebody, make a certain amount of money, and really, if you put a mark on that spectrum, this is extra right here, about 200,000, I'd say a good, just from what I know, 85% of all jobs fall below that $200,000 spectrum. You are hard pressed to get anywhere in this country where somebody will pay you in cash as your salary more than $200,000. Lawyers, financial industry, but again, the vast majority of us will not ever make more than $200,000 working for someone. Business entities, on the other hand, can make tons more than that. And not for a whole lot more effort. It's not more time that they're putting in. It's simply something involved, and we're going to get to it in a moment, involved in running a business. Now, a little extra. Just to, again, it's for pastors, church leaders, that kind of thing. Something you need to understand. What's the difference between a for-profit and non-profit? Business and non-profits. Businesses make their money. They have their income, often they call them revenues, minus expenses. And that together, or after you subtract, income from expenses equals net equity. Okay? Net equity, these are accounting terms, forgive me. Net equity is what's left over, and the business owners can then take that net equity and put it in their pockets. They can literally take that net equity out of their company and put it literally in their pockets to do whatsoever they want with it. All right? That's a for-profit. All right? How does that differ from a non-profit? Let's put it in blue just so we make it. Actually, let's keep it in black for right now. Let's do a non-profit. How does that equation differ? Not really much at all. Non-profit has its income, which often come in the form of donations. But nevertheless, it has its income. It has its expenses. And here's the interesting thing, salaries for business and for nonprofit is the largest expenditure. No matter what, almost any enterprise you go into, salaries will be your largest expenditure. And then what's left over, net equity. Here's the big difference between nonprofits and for-profits. What's left over in a nonprofit, by law, has to go back into that organization as income the next cycle. There is no such thing as taking money out to go into individual pockets. That is against the law of a nonprofit for most states, in most state laws, because businesses charter with states, not with federal government, with states. And that is against the law in almost every state. In every state, actually, I can say that pretty definitively. Why is this important for you churches? Who owns the nonprofit? The owners of the nonprofit, here, this is the owners. Let's do it this way. Who owns a for-profit? Anybody. From another individual, a person, to even a church can own a for-profit. Kirby John Caldwell was an early innovator of this, especially with his business degree, MBA background, starting for-profit enterprises, businesses, convention centers, restaurants, and taking that money, those revenues, and then funding it into the church. A church can own a for-profit. There's nothing wrong with that. They have their income expenses, but once the profit that's left over, they can take that. They can take that and run with it. Usually, of course, into a nonprofit, and then it has to stay in the nonprofit. But who are the owners of a nonprofit? The owners of a nonprofit is its board of directors. Like I said, this is extra, but trust me, you'll appreciate it, and it does tie into what we're going to talk about. Is its board of directors. this is very important for churches. It is the law, especially in the state of Texas, but in most other states as well, where the board of directors, especially of a nonprofit, cannot receive any financial benefit from the organization. Meaning they get no money from the organization. In the nonprofit world, best practices is your board of directors are your first ones to donate to the organization. So the money is not flowing to them, it's flowing from them into the organization. Why is this important? Why do I keep making this point? Because you pastors, you should not be on the board of directors of your organization, of your church. You should not be on the board of directors of your church, pastors. You should, because, why? Pastors are receiving a salary. They're getting money from the church. Therefore, you should not be on the board of directors of your church. Now you say, well, then how do I govern and keep control of my church? Well, that's in your bylaws and in your method of decision making within your church. But legally, as far as the law and the state of Texas is concerned, and most other states, pastor should not be a member, should not be a voting member of the board of directors. And why not a voting member? Because the board of directors vote on the salary of the pastor. A pastor should not be able to vote on his own salary, legally. That needs to come from the board of directors. Pastor should not be on the board of directors. All right, that's extra. But I think it'll be a great benefit in keeping you all out of jail later in your career. All right, so it's important to understand this is how business makes money. Income minus expenses and net equity, that's how it makes money. And the reason why that was relevant to our presentation is that profit is what's going to enable, especially Christian businesses, to do that extra work. Making that extra money, making that larger amounts of money allows you to do even that much more in terms of the gospel. All right? Just wanted to give you that. Lift up our eyes to the hills from whence cometh our help. All right? So, just to remind you of some of the points from the economic lecture, political economy lecture, how the economy works, investment, production, and exchange. Workers are taking their brains, bronze intellect, adding value, getting a paycheck. Enterprise owners are taking their own brains, bronze, and intellect, but adding capital, money that is, tools, natural resources, labor, site. They're managing that through the production process, and then they're exchanging that with consumers in the marketplace for a profit. And then everyone, with their profit and their paychecks, they consume it, we consume it, we save from it, which feeds investment, that's the capital connection. We pay taxes, and then we give to charity, all right? Now remember Keynesianism, I'm not going to hit it in a moment, but remember Keynesianism added this one thing. In our market system, we leave this up to business, I'm going to get to that in a moment, to move this cycle along. Keynesianism came up with the idea that government, through tax revenue, when business is not doing it, or in order to keep the economy stably growing, can invest itself. That government can take the revenues, if you will, the money from our taxes, and use that to move this economic process along. All right, that's going to be very important when we talk later. All right, just putting this out here again, just so you see it. The traditional economy, command economy, market economy. Market economy is dynamic, but has these weaknesses that are often dealt with by countries and the governments of those countries, the central governments of those countries, taking a more heavy hand in directing the economy, commanding that economy to make up for that difference. All right? And we talked about these already. I thought I wasn't going to have them there, but put them there. All right. So one of the things that's important to understand when we talk about interest groups is that we have to think of the economy as a public good. What do you mean, the economy as a public good? Well, the economy is something we want everyone to participate in, and we don't want to exclude anybody from it. Well, that's a public good. And what do you mean by that? What is it something we want everybody to participate in? The two principal benefits of the economy: goods and services and jobs. We want everybody to be able to get all the goods and services that they need. I would argue God even wants that. When He's told Adam in the garden, make it suitable for yourselves. So this is just us doing what God has told us to do, making the earth suitable for ourselves, getting the goods and services. And God even gave Adam a job, tend that garden so as to make it suitable for yourself. We want the economy to do the same for us. Give us jobs. All right? But who do we give this task of producing those jobs to? We give it to businesses. But we just recognize that businesses, or at least the owners of those businesses, start those things so as to make a profit, so as to take the money that's left over and put that in their pockets. That's why they do it. If they don't get to put that money in their pocket, they don't do it. That's one of the weaknesses of a command system. Because since the government is the one making those things run and operate and function, well, the individuals involved managing don't get to put all that money in their pocket, so they don't do it. But here's the four-letter word in the business world: risk. Why would a person not do this? Why would a person not put their money involved or pull together all those resources to move it in through production to exchange it with consumers? Because you could lose everything. And why do I say that? Because an employee, a worker in a factory, doesn't risk financial ruin by going to work. Their work they don't face that kind of threat. Now, not having a job is always the risk, and they could face financial ruin in that way. But if they lose their job, they don't lose everything they've gained. Businesses, on the other hand, at least business people, tend to put it on the line even more. Sometimes banks who they get the capital from to run their enterprise say you have to personally guarantee this loan, which is to say you have to put yourself and all that you have behind this business enterprise. Okay? So they face a risk of financial ruin. And so that's what often holds people back from jumping in and opening or starting a business. It's a whole lot easier, simpler, as we saw even in the model, of just getting a job somewhere rather than trying to pull together all these other resources and manage that through the production process to then get to the profit that comes after you exchange the product with the consumer. All right? So what does this do then? If businesses provide the jobs and the goods and services in our society, we have then given them, in exchange, a privileged position in the economy or in the society, not just in the economy. Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers, the first Secretary of the Treasury, stated it himself, and I said this already, in the economy lecture: the business of politics is business. So, literally, government recognizes, the governmental leaders recognize that business is prominent in even the political realms because of what business provides in this society: goods and services and jobs. They are the government work. Political officials recognize that business leaders are the principal decision makers in the market system. Where you live, what type of house you have, what type of appliances you may use, and what are the innovations in those appliances. The gas mileage of your car. You don't really have as much choice over that as the business owners who produce those things. Where did they decide to build your housing project? What type of gas mileage did they engineer that engine to have? These are the people who have first say over our lifestyle, really. And here's the key point when the key nexus with government. These folks, these business enterprise leaders, solicit politicians, meaning they come to politicians, and politicians sometimes come to them, to remove the risk. Four-letter word. Why wouldn't I do this? Risk. So politicians, remove the risk from my investment. Charles Lindblom, a famous leading political scientist, leader among political scientists, was one who was chief in coming up with this observation that this is what, so when we say business is coming to politicians, this is what they're coming for. It's not even evil per se. It's just that I want to make money. I want to provide these goods and services. I want to provide these jobs. Make it more likely that this will succeed for everybody. Goods and services for them, jobs for them, profit for me. Politicians, that's your job. All right? Where do we observe that, and how do we observe that? Political scientists before Lindblom definitely fell upon this observation and tend to vilify it, but nevertheless, it's how it often appears in government. We call it an iron triangle. And what do we mean? It's simply reflecting the symbiotic relationship between three different decision-making points, and three actors, I should say, two decision-making points in government. All right? So here's the interest group. They use the example, this is coming from Coleman, Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has a relationship with the members of Congress on the Committee of Armed Services. This would be actually both the Senate and House. Has a Committee of Armed Services. So, or at least a subcommittee dealing with armed services. So the interest group gives campaign contributions to members of that committee. The members of that committee listen well to what the interest group has to say in exchange for those campaign contributions. Notice I said listen. I didn't say give them what they want. I said listen. Then the interest group or the congressional committee oversees the Department of Defense that receives, that does business with or contracts oftentimes with Lockheed Martin, actually implements the programs that Congress sets out in terms of defense, which often involve contracts to companies, including companies like Lockheed Martin. And so the congressional committees will oversee these bureaucratic agencies in such a way as to either give them more funds, take away funds, give them more authority, take away authority, so that they can do or not do what Congress wants them to do. So they'll do what Congress wants to do, can do or not do what they want to do. The agency will then therefore come to the interest group because the agency needs information to do what it needs to do. It needs technical information about what type of military products are out there and what type of services our troops need. And Lockheed Martin is a company that provides those kind of things. So they will come to Lockheed Martin and say and basically look for information. What do we need? What do y'all need? What do we need? And they will have a relationship there. Well, what if the bureaucratic agency is not doing what Lockheed Martin wants to say? Well, Lockheed Martin will go back to those members of the congressional committee who they've given money to their campaign and say, hey, this agency is not doing what we want. Congressional committee will go back to those agencies and say, hey, agency, you need to pay a little more love to Lockheed Martin. Agency will go back to Lockheed Martin and change the relationship. And it can go the exact opposite way. Interest group can go to a bureaucratic agency saying, agency, hey, we need these further things for you. We got a new product for you, got a new service for you. You should check it out. Agency sends that up to congressional committee in terms of their budget request. Hey, congressional committee, there's a new product, new service that Lockheed Martin wants to offer. Congressional committee can say, yeah, we like that. We'll make that happen. They come to the interest groups. Hey, look at what we made happen for you. Show us some love in the campaign contributions. Nevertheless, describing all that to say that there exists oftentimes this symbiotic relationship between companies that do business with government, especially, but all companies, in terms of where the government regulates or influences their activities. And it works through those committees and subcommittees, which is why that's so important. To know and understand in terms of politics, and through the agencies that those committees and subcommittees oversee, because the agencies actually do the work. So when it comes to actually extending contracts and offering services, it's the agencies that do it. All right, so that's how this all tends to work itself out. All right, we'll come back to the finishing point on this in a moment. This is a very important understanding that everyone who's gone through an MBA program has come to know, at least in the recent years since 2008, called the Porter 5 Forces, because it helps understand how it is that businesses make money. So remember when we talked about this diagram here of income minus expenses? Well, this is how businesses manage that relationship, is by dealing with the Porter 5 Forces. All right. So there's rivalry amongst existing competitors, so businesses have to deal with that properly so they can keep the income coming in and expenses low. They have to bargain well with, buyers, the consumers. So obviously they got to price their products at such a level that they can get enough income to make a profit. They have to deal with suppliers who give them the tools that they need, help them get the tools that they need, resources they need to make those products. And so they have to negotiate with suppliers. Again, keeping expenses low. Then they have to deal with substitute goods and services, these other products that might compete with what they're doing. So the makers of tennis shoes, for example, have to deal with those who are making walking shoes. or gym shoes versus walking shoes, in the sense that some walking shoes are so versatile that maybe I could use them as gym shoes, and vice versa. Then they have to deal with threat of new entrants. So Adidas and Nike might be concerned that there's a new shoe company that could possibly come into the market and start displacing them. All right. The automotive companies are concerned about Tesla and its new electric car, maybe taking the place of, at least in consumers' minds, of buying the gasoline-powered cars. All right. So businesses have to be concerned with all this. Why is this important? Because those of us who think of business as evil are picking up on something, and they're picking up on this: the prisoner's dilemma of businesses, or business in general. All of those relationships, business faces a prisoner's dilemma conundrum with those entities, those forces, as Porter calls them. Let me just use one as an example. Consumers. All right? Businesses don't necessarily want to share with consumers all the information about their product. For example, I don't know if it was Ford, I can't remember right now, but the seatbelt issue in cars. Not the seatbelt, the airbag issue in cars. The fact that those airbags, when they discharged, would also send out the medical particles and whatnot that were helping to hold that airbag in, and therefore harm people, like getting shards of metal in them. That business didn't want that information getting out to the consumers, because of course if it did, consumers wouldn't buy those cars. Volkswagen didn't want the true gas mileage information about their cars getting out, because if it did, it might motivate people to buy fewer of those Volkswagens. All right? And so instead of sharing that information about the quality of their product, instead they held back that information. And consumers not knowing any better, they bought it. They bought those products where if they had that information, they wouldn't. So instead of sharing that information, consumers making the best choice for them, businesses dealing with consumer choices, instead businesses chose to withhold, to not cooperate, and thereby take advantage of the cooperation, the purchasing power of consumers. Same thing with the cost. We see that with cars all the time. No one outside the industry really knows the true cost of a car. At best we can get is the manufacturer's suggested retail price, but even that is not the cost of the car. And so a lot of what we car buyers do is go trying to figure out what's the true cost of this car, like how low can I really go in the negotiations. But it's in the interest of the business, again, to not cooperate, to not share that with us, so that we can just deal with a complete information, perfect information environment, and instead to hold back that information so that they can extract from us the maximum price, the highest price they can. All right? So you have that cost example. All right? But let me use the example that came from one of the videos that we watched, the interest group video about Lafayette coming together, the internet. So in that example, here you're going to see it, the competitor. But who was the competitor in that video? It wasn't another business per se. It was government, the city government, in terms of the utility company. The city had already been in the business of providing utilities in Lafayette, and they wanted to provide high-speed internet. Well, the cable companies, AT&T, and I believe it was Comcast or some forgive me, I can't remember their name right now. But these internet service providers that were already there in Lafayette didn't want to compete with government. Two reasons, but one reason is because, of course, if people are buying internet, high-speed internet from the local utility, they're not buying it from AT&T and the Comcast. I'm just going to use Comcast for that. And so they're losing out on revenue and therefore losing out on profit. Okay? So they didn't want that competition. Also, think about this part of it. Government doesn't face the same profit margin question, meaning how much profit is sufficient. How much is sufficient? Government can be willing to accept a whole lot less for their time and effort than an individual owner might be. And so many businesses will cry foul when the government wants to get involved in enterprises because they will say it's just unfair because the government is willing to accept much less, even a loss. Not that nonprofits operate at a loss, they should operate at a surplus, but nevertheless, an occasional loss is not a problem to a nonprofit per se, if you can overcome it in the next cycle, whereas it's a very big problem to a for-profit business. Because a loss means not only are you not making money, but again, you might risk all of your financial benefit, all your financial gain. You may risk financial ruin by operating at that loss. All right? And so, let me get to my key point here. The solution of regulation. Regulation has oftentimes a bad connotation, but it's not necessarily bad. It depends on who is looking at that regulation and what is the purpose of that regulation. Regulation can be, as we were talking about before, the prisoner's dilemma can be an enforcement of cooperation. So regulations can be good in the sense of providing information to consumers, providing information to workers, keeping competition open and fair amongst businesses. So regulation can be good if it forces businesses to actually cooperate so that everyone receives as a positive benefit instead of just business. So regulation can be good in that sense. Regulation could be not good, well, depending on your perspective, in the sense that it could constitute subsidies to businesses to actually provide those goods and services and those jobs. You see this all the time when talking about stadiums for sports teams, especially NFL teams. The city government will grant a lot of these subsidies to make sure that that company, that sports team, comes to their town and provides, well, the goods and services, a sports team, which a lot of people seem to like watching, and the jobs that come through that sports team at the stadium and in the businesses around that and all that. And so they have this exchange. Well, that often comes in the form of regulations. Or at least that's where it gets codified, put into law in the regulatory policy. And then lastly, regulation as competition. You see this again in utilities. Even the city of Houston offers water and sewer service. Basically competing with other companies, especially even in Harris County, that would love to be providing those services, but can't because, well, city of Houston does it and it can afford to do it at much less of a profit margin. And so it's keeping private companies from doing that and private people from making the profit from that and jobs and all that good stuff. The government also does it when they fund competing products. So think about all those in the coal industry. You hear that Donald Trump talking about that a lot right now. All those in the coal industry, angry when President Obama was funding, fueling money, federal money, taxpayer money, into solar and wind projects, trying to bolster up those industries. Well, that's basically improving the work of a competitor, giving them a direct subsidy, but it takes the form of regulation. These are regulatory means by which to do so. You also see it even in regulations that that make it more expensive, if you will, for make it more expensive for smaller companies, or I shouldn't say smaller companies, less wealthy companies to operate. So you see that in the example, City of Houston and Uber. City of Houston is telling Uber that you need to do full background checks on all of your drivers. Well, full background checks are more expensive than the background checks that Uber is doing already, and that means, well, just to illustrate it, higher expenses if you don't have higher revenues from it, meaning you don't raise the prices of your service. Well, then that means less profit. Well, who does that hurt? It hurts Uber because their profit equation was based on not doing those more expensive background checks, but it helps the competitors of Uber, the organized taxis, who already have created a business model that incorporates those full background checks. And so regulations can be good, can be bad, depending on your perspective. All right? All right. Let's get back to the politics of it all. Not that wasn't politics. Regulations are done by government. But nevertheless, what do we see as far as how businesses and how this business relationship plays out in our political party system? Well, it plays out historically in favor of Republicans, because Republicans definitely buy into the argument that government involvement in the economy, especially in support of certain industries, can be as a direct competitor to business. And they see that as not the role of government, to be competing against businesses in providing those goods and services in society, especially the private goods and services, as opposed to public goods. Also, businesses tend to favor Republicans because Democrats tend to side with labor, consumers, and society at large in terms of externalities. Forgive me, I didn't explain that very well. In terms of the market transactions. So in terms of those prisoners' dilemmas we talked about. And actually, let me go back to that real quick. Externalities. This is important. Here we go. Yes. Yeah. This is very important. All right. Externalities, the concept of externalities. To any private interaction, there's going to be externalities. What do I mean by this? So let's use the private interaction of someone driving down the street playing songs on their car stereo. All right? It's a private transaction in the sense that the provider of that car stereo and the driver, that's an interaction between them. The volume that they play that's between those two. All right? That's a private transaction. However, everyone who was able to hear outside of that car, everyone who's outside of that car, able to hear what's going on inside that car, is involved in that transaction. They are dealing with the externalities of that transaction. Well, there are tons of externalities involved in practically every single transaction, every single business transaction. Let's think of fracking, hydraulic fracturing, if you are familiar with that one. That's where basically they pump water and certain chemicals into the ground to break up the rock to bring up the natural gas that, of course, we can use to power a whole bunch of things. Well, many are arguing, and the evidence is starting to convincingly say, that earthquakes result from that. Well, the company doesn't deal with the earthquakes. The societies around the drilling deal with the earthquakes. And the companies don't want to pay for those earthquakes. Again, companies trying to keep their expenses low, not raise them up. So they then try to push those externalities out onto the larger society. And therefore, again, government regulations often take the form of forcing those companies to deal or pay the costs involved with those externalities. All right? Now we can get back to what I want to get to. There we go. Oh, I need to go back. Sorry. Forgive me on that. There we go. All right. So, yes, I got the society part. I want to get that part. Now, so that if business tends to favor Republicans, you'll see that in the campaign contribution totals of the Republican Party versus Democratic Party, literally since we've been tracking campaign contributions and practically at every single level of government. But, big caveat, giant caveat here. Businesses will give to any political official. Why? Because the politicians are actually in the seats of power. Meaning, who can direct the coercive power of government? The person in the seat. Does it matter which party they are in? No. They have the seat. Meaning they have the authority based on their role, their function in that particular place in government to direct the power of government. Meaning, direct the regulations. Send favorable regulations my way, send unfavorable regulations my way. And so, yes, businesses do tend to favor Republicans, but they will give to anybody. Or at least seek the attention of anybody in government. All right? And then let me finish with asking this question, or addressing this question. So then how do politicians get away with it? Actually, I'm sorry. There's a slide I want to show you. I often leave my slides too soon. How do politicians get away with it? How does government policy follow public opinion, or does government policy follow public opinion, or vice versa? And so despite opinions, one of the truisms we see in political science, American politics, despite ambiguities in public opinion, most research suggests that policies follow public opinion. Meaning, what it is that the populace wants, the average voter wants, policy tends to favor that. Okay? But how can that be true And yet, we see narrowly focused interest groups getting what they want out of government. How can both of those things be true? Let me explain. All right. So let's imagine an iceberg, or I'm going to use the image of an iceberg. All right. So this is the iceberg. This iceberg is the behavior of the public official. This is what the public official does. So from speaking in whatever legislative chamber, gathering whatever executive branch bureaucratic information, this is what the public official does. This represents the waterline, if you will, of the iceberg. Everything that's above the waterline is what's visible. This is the part that we, the voters, see. All right, that the media catches, reflects to us. This is the part that we see. All right. Notice it's very small. Political scientist called Arnold Mayhew, termed this concept the electoral connection. And the idea behind the electoral connection is that savvy politicians, meaning good politicians, meaning those who are able to get themselves elected and reelected, know how to say what they need to say, do what they need to do, act in such a way, at least in their visible actions, such that they please those who select them. Okay? They are savvy that way. Savvy politicians. They know what to do to reflect what people want. And it may be that they're sincere in doing that. I'm not trying to say that they're evil or that they're being disingenuous. They may be very sincere in that. But nevertheless, their public behavior reflects what it is that those politicians want. Or what the public wants, I should say. It was Arnold Mayhew's student, Douglas, come on, why am I forgetting all my terms? Forgive me, y'all. Forgetting his term. Anyway, forget it. But it was his student who came up with this revelation. And that is the fact that those same politicians will then try to hide the traceability of their other behavior, particularly that behavior that is not what their constituents or the electoral district or those who select them would want. Okay? And so they try to decrease. Actually, yes, that's his name, Douglas Arnold. Try to decrease how easy it is for the public to trace their behavior back to that public official. And that they do this through three different mechanisms. One being the tax code. We talked about regulations. Well, many of those regulations that business deals with is in the tax code. Our tax code, the U.S. federal tax code, is humongous, thousands and thousands of pages long, because they're filled with these small, seemingly small regulations that, well, the rest of us don't know about and can't really keep track of. But those who benefit from it, they know it very well. What was an article I read once that said the best tax firm in the country is the one housed in Walmart, that works for the company of Walmart. It's internal to Walmart because they know that tax code and they know how every single provision in that tax code affects them, and they use it, of course, to their benefit. The public officials know that too. They did it that way on purpose, to be able to give Walmart what it wants, but then also to keep that electoral connection with those who select them. Congress or government officials will also use omnibus activity, specifically legislation. What do I mean by omnibus? It's a formal term that means wrapping a whole bunch of individual pieces of legislation together, especially when talking about budget bills, appropriations bills that come out every year. Congress will often lump those together. And so it's a whole lot harder to know exactly what's going on in a 1,000-page bill than it is to know what's going on in an 80-page bill. And so they will lump it all together and make it harder, again, for people to trace that individual congressman's activity or congresswoman's activity back to them. And then lastly, they'll delegate. Delegate to the bureaucracy. So one of the reasons Congress went along, if you will, or at least one of the benefits to Congress of going along with FDR when he was shifting so much decision-making to the bureaucracy, was it allows the congressperson in their activities and in their words to always be standing with my district, but then allow the bureaucrats to, or even direct the bureaucrats to, remember what we talked about Iron Triangle, direct the bureaucrats to do things that benefit those interest groups. And so how is it that both public policy and political behavior seems to, public policy can favor the public, whereas political behavior can favor the interest groups? It's based on this. The truism, the dual truism of an electoral connection where everything a politician does that is visible is what their public wants them to do. But there's a lot of other parts of their behavior that we don't see that benefits those who have a more particular interest. Everybody.